What up, everyone? Big Kev back in the building. Today we're checking out one called The Insane World of Medieval MMA. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's check it out. Not quite sure what to expect with this one. I mean, the idea of combining medieval times weaponry and armor with MMA seems like a pretty odd pairing, but I'm into it. Let's go.
Tell me how the grass tastes, little man.
How the grass tastes, little man.
For
And they
thousands
got
of
knocked
years,
out one
humans have
shot.
been testing their strength and prowess on the battlefield and in arenas. From the first gladiatorial games to deadly jousting, even now, fighting overweight men in front of millions is incredibly popular.
Yes,
Yet
it is.
despite the big resurgence of things like boxing, MMA, and combat sports in general, one has crept out the woodwork like no other. Something new, yet hundreds of years old at the same time. Welcome to the insane world of medieval MMA.
Oh, they actually do it in rings? M1, that's like a legit organization, I believe. Oh! Holy shit. Man, he was slamming with that shield. I mean,
Between the 12th and 16th centuries,
granted, you got on
became
some armor,
tradition
but
and a great game for knights or other soldiers to show their strength
That's
without the
pretty brutal.
same sort of dangers that they would see on the battlefield. Sure, you can get yourself bruised and battered, but the likelihood of fighting in the arena at least mean you get to go home at night. In the meantime, being able to show off your new armor that you paid a pretty penny for, and especially your skill, winning over fame, money, and of course the potential of future renown was a tempting thing back in the day. I mean,
Yeah.
who's going to get the highest wages as mercenaries, guards, or even showmen? Well, of course, the best fighters, and they reveal themselves in front of the crowds. Despite the notion that these games were fights to the death, it wasn't particularly common and really could be seen as the equivalent to a modern day MMA fight. Scuffed up, sure, embarrassed.
I guess regular fight wasn't enough for these people nowadays. They wanted to get a little more gladiator into it, put on the armor and don the helmets and the shield, and I think I even saw swords, hoping they're blunted swords, and kind of fight like they did back in the day.
Yeah, definitely. But dead? No, probably not. Unless that is your name's Henry II of France, who, during an ill-advised jousting tournament in 1559, a wooden lance of his younger opponent pierced through the king's headgear, shattering into fragments and penetrating his right orbit and temple. He, of course, died from that. And shortly the decline of such tournaments started to happen. Okay, they weren't necessarily that directly linked, but the point stands. Okay, so how do we go from French kings in the 16th century getting splinters in their head to funny hat-wearing Americans slapping axes on their buddy's skull? Well, have you ever heard of LARPing? Okay, it might be an unpopular opinion given the kind of videos I make and probably my audience.
Yeah, that was like the live
it's not
action
my
role
thing.
playing. That's
Dressing up and running around the forest with phone weapons, sort of like chivalry meets capture the flag.
I was gonna
I
say
could
those
think of
weapons
better
were
things to do on
foam. I
Sunday, if I'm
thought
gonna
they
be
didn't
honest.
use
But it
real
was in Ukraine that they
weapons.
thought, hey, this LARPing stuff, this is for weak people. The soft touch of foam was a little bit
Of
too
course it
boring for
came
their
from
taste, and they
Ukraine,
wanted
Russia area
to
of
do
the
something
world.
a bit more rough. So, donning full plate armor, equipping real, granted blunt, but still real weapons, they started
So they are
battering each
blunted
other
weapons.
on the good old noggin. This came in many forms,
Still do a
from
hell of a lot of
huge
damage,
field
though.
battles of hundreds of men at the same time with teams, to smaller tag team based events, to even then progressing into the octagon. The game started to grow, and in 2009,
Oh, so they actually started off full-scale battles and then slowly whittled their way down into like one-on-one MMA fights. Okay.
first Battle of Nations was held in Ukraine. What is Battle of Nations, I hear you ask? Well, let's take a look.
Look at that dude.
The Battle of the Nations was no small event. This was
I see a lot of
huge.
concussions in these
They
guys'
hired
futures.
out a full castle in Ukraine. They were not skimping on this thing.
Nice.
National
At
teams
least
of
they went
different
big.
countries came to compete here with, of course, set rules. Each team had at least 8 up to a maximum of 50 fighters, any representative of any of the historical.
Did the other team have to match, or was it allowed to be 50 on 8? Because that doesn't seem like too kosher. That doesn't seem pretty fair.
Battle clubs, which, yes, are a huge thing that do exist. You see, when all of this started, of course, people wanted to form their own teams. HMB clubs, or historical medieval battle clubs, started to come from it, most of the time in Europe and of course the UK as well. And Battle of the Nations, whilst being the largest, is not the only one. These leagues have gone on all across the world, even in the US, where they have some absolutely humongous wars. These are events that are held every year, where they split up the country into 3 different sections as trying to replicate a medieval Europe. Then thousands of people fight, and of course, in their different teams, the winner wins. It's simple as that. And it was this that I saw that really changed my idea of what this LARPing could be.
How is the winner determined? Is it like last man standing? Is it like capture the flag, or like do they have to like complete some kind of obstacle, like reach the other side of the other team's like encampment or something? Or is it just like whoever is left standing, that's the winner?
Because it doesn't have a great name, and me, as I mentioned, I'm not the huge fan because of videos like this.
Red 2, red 3.
Blow 2, killing blow 3.
But I think anybody with a screwed on head can tell that there is a difference between running around with foam swords and full-out medieval battles.
Yeah, way different.
Okay, I still think they cater towards a similar audience. I'm not gonna beat around the bush there. Going back to the Battle of Nations, they only had 4 countries taking part,
Similar,
being
more
Ukraine,
hardcore
Poland,
audience,
Belarus, and
I would
Russia.
say.
Probably countries you wouldn't be surprised being there. And they had all these different game modes. There were hundreds of people that came to watch, and also hundreds of people that took part from all these different countries. You had your 1v1 duels, which was pretty self-explanatory. 2 knights would get into the battlefield, and it would be scored on different hits, so on and so forth. Now, I've heard different rules in different events in different leagues, some of them being 3 points of contact on the floor, some of them being a little bit more like boxing, depending on where you hit, whether it's the head, the shoulders, knees and toes, indicates how many points you score.
So it seems like every place kind of has its own thing going
5v5,
on right now.
a little bit more like your group fighting event, where you do have some partners, but it's still a smaller scale where a lot of the time you'll end up in 1v1s. Here it's so important to be the team that gets that first kill. And then you have your 25 versus 25 all-out battles. These were chaos. And in all honesty, it didn't end there. In later years, it got even bigger.
How big is this one?
In just 4 years, they went from the original group in Eastern Europe to over 20 teams and 400 fighters, with even people from the US and Canada coming in to compete. I mean, what's medieval Europe without a few Americans? As the sport started to grow, so did the organizations. There were splinter groups that came off with, of course, defunct people that weren't liking the way Battle of Nations was being held, and like every other sport, the Russians were accused of cheating. But you had these homegrown athletes that came out of nowhere that didn't have a place in mainstream sports that would then grow some sort of fame within the medieval community. 𝐄𝐪𝐻 𝐸𝐻𝐭 was a huge Russian man that liked to beat people up all the time. He was very strong and he killed many people. He didn't kill anybody, but he kept winning. And he started to gain fame. Then Alexej Petrik in Prague in 2016 took his crown, and well, since then he has been #1 in the male category 1v1 fighting. And that caused everybody to wonder, okay, this is great, we've got some cool events here, but what if we wanted to go even more competitive? What is more competitive than 50 people in a small arena battering the hell out of each other?
Судья, время. Готов.
Put it in an actual octagon ring. There's like the metal cage right around the bottom of it. The netting. Just those shield shots look so brutal. Yeah. Yeah, he definitely looks like he might be unconscious. And he is, yeah.
Okay, well, I don't actually know how serious it was for the fighters. I'm assuming somewhat, but this actually started as kind of a joke. In the middle of a Russian MMA broadcast at the halftime show, they wanted to put on these two medieval lads beating each other up. It then gained 15 million views online. So there was definitely
we need
an
to do more of
audience
this.
because the rules were somewhat different. Instead of points of contact and, of course, getting points for certain hits on the body, this was about knocking your opponent out, using whatever way you can to get them to the ground and getting them to tap out, a lot like regular MMA. Until the referee calls it off, it is fair game. You can take their legs out. You can, of course, hit them with your sword. You can batter them with your shield. You can get them on the floor and repeatedly pound their head into the canvas until it starts bleeding, or until the referee decides that enough is enough.
Yeah.
The funniest thing about this stuff is people still don't know how to handle it because it is quite funny, okay? These are full-grown men in full suits of armor, but they are taking it so seriously, and rightly so. This is a dangerous sport.
Yeah.
People do get injured.
Once you decide to
Not
do
just
it,
in
you
this
gotta do
medieval
it. You gotta
MMA
take it
fights, but even in
seriously.
the Battle of
Otherwise,
Nations,
you're gonna get hurt.
I guess this might be sacrilege, but the more casual versions, broken bones, bashed in heads, unconscious, people were taken off by stretchers. These are real weapons, and whilst they have been blunted, they are still going to be incredibly painful.
There
Being
need to be a
smacked
lot of
down
medics on
you
hand
from
for these
behind.
events, because
And,
there's
well,
lots of injuries.
The commentators of these medieval MMA events clearly still don't quite understand what they're seeing.
Oh!
So it makes you wonder, what kind of people does this attract? And actually, the more I think about it, this isn't surprising at all. You might think the main audience for medieval MMA or Battle of Nations style event is complete computer nerds, right? However, I don't think so. Because the way that people have evolved is completely different to the way technology has. And whilst warfare has completely
Kind of like
changed,
normal brawlers,
humans
like,
have not.
you know, want
There
to
is
fight
still
but don't
something
actually want to
quite enticing about heading into the arena with
train,
a full
like, at an
plate of
elite
suit
level,
armor to
so
show
they
off
can
your
kind of
sword
put on
skills,
some armor
to
and-
practice some cool moves, and to batter someone's head in. Now, I don't necessarily speak for everyone here, but I think the inherent need to show off your strength in combat sports hasn't changed since even the medieval period. So it's not that surprising that this has become so successful. Don't get me wrong, you can look at LARPing and you can think that this is somewhat entertaining and funny to laugh at.
This
When
version's
someone's
weird with
dressed
the
up
net
in
in the middle, with the
incredibly
the
heavy
rope
plate
in the
armor,
middle
sweating
separating
through
them.
their visor that they can hardly see
I
out
like
of,
this
and
MMA
getting whacked
version
on the head
better.
by metal poles, and it's somewhat impressive, especially in the high-end professional versions of this sport, to see the athleticism that comes out of it. These guys are proper athletes, putting in the training, putting in the work, and whilst it might not be a mainstream thing yet, you can see the same elements that we have in combat sports such as boxing and MMA. Most of these people get into it through reenactment groups. You might have heard of HEMA, or Historical European Martial Arts, which is another more controlled form of this. You have professional referees that know exactly what they're doing and how to keep people safe. You have
one
groups
medieval.
that have formed over years of people training and coming together to share a passion and finally wanting to compete, to show off what they've learned against other countries and other teams. And of course, the cash prizes that most certainly come with it.
It's kind of insane, the
This
sports
is
that
a
people
really
get
interesting
involved in,
rabbit hole
pass
to
some
delve
time.
into. And I think more stuff like this should be encouraged. More unique niche sports, and something like medieval MMA that draws you in from the sheer spectacle and questioning what the hell is going on, but then keeps you there with the real athleticism, skill, and brutality of this combat
I mean,
sport.
yeah, it's got to be
There's
fun to
nothing
watch. I
quite
mean,
like it.
lots of
It is a
action.
sport that is ever
I'm
growing,
sure there's a
but
lot
it's
of
held
brutal
back by one
moments
factor.
throughout.
And it's not necessarily the fact
That's
that
why gladiator
it draws
games
in
were
a
so
niche
popular
community
back
of
in the day, and
historical
why
nerds,
they
but more
MMA
because
and
it
boxing
is
are still so
incredibly
popular
expensive to get
today.
into. This
People
is
love
not cheap armor.
a little
you have to
controlled
spend
violence in their
thousands
lives.
on this sort of stuff, especially if you want to actually get it molded and tailored to you and your body for it to be any sort of comfortable. But most people are spending upwards of $10,000 to get into this.
That's an
Then, of
expensive
course,
hobby.
you actually have to get to the events in your
Europe.
armor. And I think this accessibility is something that is drawing this sport back from becoming just another mainstream combat sport. I mean, it's not so far off stuff that we already have, but because it is so inaccessible to the majority of its audience, well, hardly any people can get involved. But maybe that is something that will change. Who knows? Maybe Amazon will start mass manufacturing medieval sets of armor, and at that point,
they can
Anybody
make money
get
by
involved.
it. They'll do it.
Anybody can don their plate, their chainmail or gambeson, and smash some heads in with a halberd. But hey, for now, I'm just gonna have to watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, there definitely is some barrier to entry buying that armor, getting it fitting, getting blunted swords and shields, and traveling to whatever weird location they're having their contest in, and lodging and all that just to compete in like one or two events. I mean, yeah, it's probably not the simplest sport to break into. Yeah, that's a pretty wild one. I've never seen medieval MMA before. I wonder if it's still I don't know how old that video is. I heard them mention 2016, 2017. So I don't know if this one is super current or not. I'll have to check, but I wonder if the sports con that kind of continued to grow, or if it's kind of started to plateau at all. I've never seen any M1 MMA fights before or clips before on YouTube. I'll have to search some out and see if there's more of them out there. But yeah, definitely a crazy sport. I've seen some other wild ones. I mean, what do you think is crazier, medieval MMA or